Anger versus rage. Biological, psychological, and philosophical breakdown. Anger and rage are two emotional states that are often conflated due to their outward similarities. However, a closer examination reveals that they differ significantly across biological, philosophical, psychological, evolutionary, and historical dimensions. This video explores these distinctions to provide a comprehensive understanding of these emotions. Biological perspective. From a biological standpoint, anger and rage are rooted in the brain's limbic system, which governs emotional responses. However, they manifest with differing levels of intensity and physiological mechanisms. Anger is a natural and controlled emotional response triggered by perceived threats, frustrations, or injustices. Anger results in the release of catecholamines like adrenaline and noradrenaline, leading to increased heart rate, blood pressure, respiration, and muscle tension. Blood flow is diverted away from digestion and towards the muscles, preparing the body for action. The amygdala, hypothalamus, and prefrontal cortex work together to regulate anger. The prefrontal cortex plays a crucial role in assessing the situation and determining whether the anger response is justified. This regulation ensures that anger is proportional and often serves as a motivator for problem-solving or self-assertion. Physiologically, anger causes moderate activation of the autonomic nervous system. Adrenaline is released, leading to increased heart rate, blood pressure, and energy levels, preparing the individual to address the source of their anger. Despite this activation, the body remains within a range that allows for conscious control and rational decision-making. Rage, by contrast, is a more extreme and dysregulated activation of these systems. It is often associated with feelings of helplessness, vulnerability, or deep humiliation. Rage is also dominated by the amygdala and the hypothalamus, with minimal involvement of the prefrontal cortex. The surge of adrenaline and other stress hormones is significantly greater, leading to a more pronounced increase in physiological arousal. The amygdala's activity becomes dominant, often overwhelming the prefrontal cortex's regulatory capacity. Rage is marked by extreme physiological changes, including surges of cortisol and adrenaline, severe elevation of heart rate, and hyperventilation. This can result in a temporary cortical shutdown, where rational thought and judgment are severely impaired. The individual may experience tunnel vision, auditory exclusion, and an overwhelming urge to act, often aggressively. This biological cascade explains the loss of control as rage pushes the body into a survival mode, where rational thought is suppressed in favor of immediate action. Neurochemically, both states involve various neurotransmitters. Serotonin, often associated with mood regulation, is implicated in both, with lower levels potentially predisposing individuals to heightened anger and aggression. Dopamine, involved in reward and motivation, also plays a role, particularly in the impulsive actions associated with rage. Philosophical perspective. Philosophically, anger and rage have been subjects of inquiry for centuries, with thinkers exploring their ethical, moral, and existential implications. Anger. Philosophers like Aristotle considered anger a natural and potentially virtuous emotion when expressed appropriately. In his Nicomachean Ethics, Aristotle argued that anger is justified when it arises in response to genuine injustice and is directed toward the right person at the right time and in the right measure. This concept of righteous anger aligns with the idea of anger as a rational emotion that can drive moral action and societal progress. Augustine of Hippo discussed anger in his writings, viewing it as a vice that needs to be overcome through the practice of Christian virtues. He believed that anger is a result of pride and that humility is the antidote to anger. In Buddhism, anger is considered one of the three poisons, along with greed and delusion, that cause suffering. The Buddha teaches that anger can be overcome through mindfulness, meditation, and the cultivation of compassion. Friedrich Nietzsche had a complex view of anger. He criticized the Christian morality that he associated with resentment and a desire for revenge. He saw this type of anger as a sign of weakness and a hindrance to human flourishing. However, Nietzsche also recognized the potential of anger as a source of creative energy and a motivator for self-improvement. He believed that a noble form of anger, directed towards improving oneself and the creation of new values, could be a powerful force for individual and cultural transformation. Martin Heidegger, a phenomenologist, explores the concept of anger in relation to human existence and the concept of being. He argues that anger can be a response to the frustration of human existence and the limitations of human freedom. Rage. On the other hand, rage has been viewed as a destructive force. The Stoics, for example, advocated for the suppression of intense emotions, including rage, as they believed such emotions cloud judgment and lead to irrational actions. Seneca, in his treatise On Anger, warned against the dangers of unbridled rage, describing it as a form of temporary madness that undermines virtue and reason. Aristotle discussed rage in his Rhetoric, where he viewed it as an intense and overwhelming emotion that can lead individuals to commit atrocities. He argued that rage can be a result of intense anger, pain, or frustration. Immanuel Kant, a German philosopher, argued that rage is a desertion of control, where individuals abandon reason and moral responsibility. According to Kant, rage is a violation of moral law, which demands that individuals treat others with respect and dignity. Jean-Paul Sartre, a French philosopher, viewed rage as a form of bad faith that arises from a desire to escape the responsibility of freedom. According to Sartre, rage is a way of avoiding the anxiety and uncertainty of human existence by surrendering to a blind and unthinking passion. According to Søren Kierkegaard, rage could be interpreted as a desperate attempt to assert oneself in the face of despair, a violent outburst against the perceived meaninglessness of existence. However, Kierkegaard would likely argue that this is a misguided response, as it only deepens the despair and further alienates the individual. From a contemporary perspective, existential philosophers might interpret rage as a response to existential threats or profound disconnection. Unlike anger, which can be channeled constructively, rage may signify a breakdown of meaning or a loss of agency. Psychological perspective. Psychologically, anger and rage are understood through their triggers, expressions, and impacts on behavior and mental health. Anger is a common and healthy emotion that plays a functional role in human relationships and self-preservation. It is typically triggered by specific, identifiable stimuli such as perceived injustices, frustration, or unmet expectations. Anger can be expressed constructively through communication, problem-solving, or setting boundaries. Cognitive behavioral theories emphasize the role of thought patterns in anger. For instance, individuals prone to anger may have cognitive distortions, such as overgeneralization or catastrophizing, which amplify their emotional response. However, anger often subsides once the underlying issue is addressed or resolved. Rage, on the other hand, is often seen as a more primitive and intense emotion that arises from a sense of overwhelm or helplessness. It can be associated with a range of psychological disorders, including intermittent explosive disorder, IED, post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, and borderline personality disorder. The individual may perceive threats where none exist, and interpret neutral events as hostile. Rage is often associated with deeper psychological disturbances or chronic stress. It can be triggered by cumulative frustrations, traumatic experiences, or even neurological conditions. Unlike anger, rage tends to lack clear focus and may result in explosive, uncontrollable outbursts. It is often described as a blind fury that can overwhelm an individual's capacity for rational thought and self-control. Psychologists have linked rage to disorders such as IED, where individuals experience sudden and disproportionate episodes of fury. Such episodes are often accompanied by feelings of regret or guilt once the rage subsides, highlighting the lack of control inherent in this emotion. Rage can have destructive consequences, leading to aggressive behaviors, physical violence, and damage to relationships. Evolutionary perspective. From an evolutionary standpoint, anger and rage have distinct roles in survival and adaptation. Anger evolved as a social signal and a mechanism for self-defense. It motivates individuals to defend themselves, their resources, and their offspring. Anger serves to communicate dissatisfaction, assert dominance, and negotiate social hierarchies. Moderate anger can deter potential aggressors and signal a willingness to defend oneself or one's group, thereby preventing further conflict. In group dynamics, anger can also foster cohesion by addressing unfair behavior and reinforcing social norms. For example, collective anger against injustice can lead to social movements and systemic change. Rage, on the other hand, is often seen as a survival mechanism which represents a more extreme and less adaptive response. It arises in situations where threats are perceived as immediate and overwhelming, leaving no room for negotiation or social signaling. In such scenarios, rage enhances physical strength, speed, and aggression, increasing the likelihood of survival during direct confrontations. However, rage can also be maladaptive in modern contexts, where its intensity may lead to actions that are socially or legally unacceptable. It can lead to impulsive and destructive actions that may harm the individual and their social group. The evolutionary utility of rage diminishes in environments where complex social interactions and rule-based systems prevail. Historical perspective. Historically, anger and rage have been represented and interpreted differently across cultures and eras, reflecting their complex social and moral dimensions. Anger, in many cultures, has been depicted as both a personal and communal force. Ancient texts, such as the Bible and the Iliad, often portray anger as a motivating force behind significant events. For instance, Achilles' anger in the Iliad drives much of the narrative, highlighting both its destructive and transformative potential. Throughout history, controlled expressions of anger have been used to challenge oppression and demand justice. The civil rights movement, for example, channeled collective anger into non-violent resistance, demonstrating how anger can be a catalyst for positive change. Rage, however, has historically been associated with chaos and loss of control. Mythologies and literature often depict rage as a destructive force that leads to tragedy. In ancient times, rage was often associated with madness, barbarism, or demonic possession. In ancient Rome, rage was seen as a sign of weakness or lack of control, and it was often stigmatized and punished. In Norse mythology, berserkers were warriors who entered a state of uncontrollable rage during battle, embodying both the power and peril of this emotion. In modern times, rage has been linked to social unrest and acts of violence. While anger can inspire movements for change, rage often manifests as riots or uncoordinated acts of aggression, highlighting its potential to undermine collective efforts. Rage is also linked to domestic violence, sexual assault, and other human-to-human personal abuses such as murder. Epilogue: Anger versus rage. Anger and rage, while closely related, are distinct emotional states with unique characteristics and implications. Biologically, anger is a moderated response, while rage represents an extreme loss of control. Philosophically, anger is often seen as virtuous when justified, whereas rage is viewed as irrational and destructive. Psychologically, anger is a functional emotion that facilitates resolution, whereas rage can indicate deeper disturbances. Evolutionarily, anger serves as a social tool, while rage is a primal survival mechanism. Historically, anger has been a force for justice and change, while rage has been associated with chaos and destruction. Understanding these distinctions is crucial for managing emotions effectively and fostering healthy interpersonal and societal dynamics. By recognizing the triggers and expressions of anger and rage, individuals can channel these powerful emotions toward constructive outcomes.